This story happened when I served in the Air Force and was stationed in the southern United States. I won't name the base, but I'm sure many will figure out which one as soon as I share a few details. This story took place a few years after my tour there. I first arrived at that base in 2006, and like many new recruits, I was greeted with a slew of terrifying stories. There were tales of a man in a top hat who walked along a dark, long, narrow dirt road on the edge of the storage complex. There was another story about a madman who was hit by a patrol car and ran off into the woods near the same place. But my story is tied to another legend I was told. It was my second night shift. As far as I remember, I was working with a service member who had been there for several years. He told a story about a little girl who visited her father back when the warehouse we worked in was being built, long before our time. The story went like this: the little girl was playing on some of the structures while her father worked, but she died, slipping off the edge at the very top of the structure. Most of the story didn't make much sense to me at the time, but despite the facts, it scared me badly. What's more, that service member drove me to the exact spot where it supposedly happened. He killed the engine and the music, and we just sat in silence. He spooked me a few times, but nothing happened. Now to the events from 3 years ago. That night I was assigned to work that same section of the base. Keep in mind I'd been visiting this place for many years, but by then the warehouse area was completely shut down except for a few small zones that required physical checks and inspections. The shift itself started off rough. My partner from the Alpha flight and I were given a livestock hauler to patrol in, since our regular vehicle was in maintenance. Yes, I'm not kidding, a livestock truck. Sounds unimportant, but it'll matter. Fast forward a few hours. We had 3 random warehouse checks scheduled for the night. We'd already completed 2 without issue. Around 4 in the morning we decided to do the last one, since the main maintenance crews had gone home. The only way in was through 2 very large separate gates that took forever to open. We drove in, locked the gates behind us, and continued. My Alpha was driving, I was the spotter, checking the locks on each structure with a flashlight. Important detail: the story about the little girl took place on a road inside the warehouse area that we called Echo Street. Up to this point everything was fine, and we were wrapping up. My Alpha made the final turn onto Echo Street. We'd been pretty chatty most of the night, just joking around, when a wave of unease washed over me. Something had changed, but I couldn't tell what. We were about halfway down when everything became almost completely, eerily quiet. Even the clatter of our livestock truck and the faint hum of the radio seemed to fade as we approached the structure from my earlier story. I have to emphasize, even now, telling this part, I get goosebumps and my eyes well up from fear. As we neared the structure, I turned my head toward the opposite window, and from my left ear I heard a sound that nearly made me piss myself. It was a moan or wail, like the girl's moans from the movie The Grudge. A faint, creepy groan began to spread through the cab between us, in the dark emptiness of the middle seat. I felt my blood run cold, snapped my head toward my partner, and yelled, "Dude, knock it off." My Alpha looked at me, confused. He eased off the gas and asked, "Am I going too fast?" I paused, signaled, "Hold." I listened, and heard it again. My partner cut in and asked what was wrong. I quickly turned the music off without saying anything at first, and then I whisper to him, "Do you hear that?" He stops the truck in confusion and listens closely. It was almost dead silent for a second or two when we both hear it this time, that long chilling groan of a woman. It echoed in my ears. It sounded like someone was struggling to breathe and taking in a giant breath of air while someone was trying to strangle them. The sound was beyond terrifying, and the fact that I wasn't the only one hearing it only made it more of a horrifying experience. I found myself beginning to ask him my original question again, but he quickly interrupts and says with a strong sound of fear in his voice, "What the is that?" We stupidly waited to see if we could hear it again. The rumble of the gates on the back of the truck are easily heard and recognized, as they made a sort of metal-on-metal clatter, and the diesel engine has that typical rumble as well. But in between both the noises we heard it again for the final Time that groan it sounded even louder, but this time it sounded like it was coming from both inside and outside of the truck, like we were being surrounded by whatever was making that noise of distress without even making a peep. My alpha puts the truck in drive and he hauls our asses off that street quicker than I have ever gone on any other street in that entire base. He nearly flips the truck going around a curve, but it doesn't bother us one bit. We were both in an unspoken agreement that we wanted to get out of there quickly. We got to the 2 gates again and I hopped out of the truck as fast as I could. My alpha watched my back as I quickly opened both gates. He jumped back into the driver's seat, sped out and waited for me to close both gates as well. Once we completed that task, we quickly returned to the main part of the base and we requested to meet with our flight chief to tell him what had happened. When we finally met up with him, we expected him to think that we were both full of, or that we had just imagined the entire thing, being as it was so late into our 12-hour shift and we were both tired. But I clearly remember him saying to the both of us, "I completely believe you. As a matter of fact, I had something like that happen to me twice, once in that same place and the other in that building behind you," as he points at our jailhouse again. I know that sounds completely cliche with that grudge-like moan we had heard, but it honestly happened and it still brings those tears of fright into my eyes every time I tell it. I went back to that storage area only once after that, but I never went down that road again and I never went after dark. I haven't told my story to many people, only my wife and a few close friends. It happened when I was in the army as a radio operator during the Vietnam War, and I still haven't forgotten it. I was a young draftee, fresh out of high school. I didn't know much about the war, had no idea what I was getting into. But I did know I had a duty to my fellow servicemen. We arrived on a Friday evening and were loaded onto buses to the barracks. The air was very humid, the ground soggy after a passing storm. I remember the drive and that sewer stench. My first night was quiet, but we all felt the tense atmosphere as our drill instructors taunted us with stories during formation. I remember the half-moon peeking out from behind the clouds. I was more of a technical guy than a jokester, so I just listened. My duty was to manage communications between our unit and the others so everyone knew what was going on. I carried a radio box on my back and a ton of gear. I was quickly assigned to a tight-knit platoon whose radio operator had been killed by a landmine. The first time we made contact with the enemy was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. We were in dense jungle, couldn't see them at all, but we ducked as soon as they opened fire and returned fire in their general direction. The chaos seemed endless, probably a couple of minutes. We advanced to secure the area, and I saw the enemy up close for the first time, 3 dead fighters lying in a pool of their own blood. I couldn't believe I was looking at people who had been alive moments earlier, young guys with families. Still, I felt justified. They were the enemy, and otherwise they'd be standing over our bodies. A few days later we were reassigned to another area with heavier casualties, more support needed. I grew accustomed to the violence and saw many of our young men die in pain. One day my NCO told me someone wanted to speak with me. An older man in his late 50s stood there, completely out of place. Calculated, deliberate demeanor. Even our CO turned into a yes man around him. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Colonel R.K. Dowell, an intelligence officer, and said I was being assigned to him as an RTO. I wanted to stay with my platoon, but orders are orders. We boarded a Huey and left. We landed in a heavily wooded area next to several enemy huts. The place was built up, easy to imagine the fight that must have happened there. Some guys wore gas masks, others stood nearby, but they didn't seem to notice me. The atmosphere felt wrong, unnatural. These men didn't act like normal soldiers, their eyes lacked the usual fear. I tried to talk to a few, just blank, emotionless stares, like they were infected with something. It set me on edge. Dowell and I entered one of the smaller huts. I was told to stay put until someone came for me. I should have waited, but curiosity won. I made my way to the main tent and peeked inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. On a makeshift table lay 6 murky containers. Each held a severed guerrilla fighter's head, with tubes and wires running from them. A green liquid seemed to be reacting, their mouths and eyes twitching like they were half alive. A hand grabbed my shoulder, it was Dowell, furious. I whispered, asking what they were doing in there. He snapped that I shouldn't have gone in and sent me back. We must have been attacked or something, because I woke up a day later in triage with several broken ribs and a fractured collarbone, with no memory of what happened after that. I never saw Lieutenant Colonel R.K. Dowell or those soldiers again, if that was even his real name. I often wonder what they were doing. Maybe trying to extract intel from dead enemy soldiers. Either way, it was a strange experience I'll never forget. All names in the story have been changed, and locations left out. This experience left me very paranoid in many ways. It was late into the night. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my chest as our armored vehicle veered off the gravel road, plowing through dense underbrush. For weeks, Bravo Squad had been silent, vanishing like a wisp of smoke. The distress call had crackled through our comms earlier, an unexpected sign of life from our long-missing comrades. But what haunted me more than their sudden re-emergence was the content of the message, a cryptic string of numbers. "Sergeant Davis, are you sure this is the place?" I asked over the static hiss. "That's what command confirmed." "Get ready," Davis replied as our vehicle came to a halt. The fog thickened. We disembarked into the unknown. The silence of the abandoned base grew increasingly unsettling. Buildings stood like hollowed-out husks, shattered windows, doors ajar. A thriving hub just weeks ago, now a ghost town. In a whisper, Davis ordered us to stay sharp. Our boots crunched on glass and debris. Signs of struggle were everywhere: overturned furniture, bloodied rags, scattered ammunition. We headed toward the command center. The transmission grew louder, a monotone chant drilling into my mind. Inside, the air was stale, the only light came from blinking consoles. The speaker, crackling with static, repeated the sequence over and over: 58247. "What does it mean?" Corporal Lee whispered, eyes wide. "Commander Haskins might have known," Davis said. Haskins was the unit's leader who had vanished along with his team. We continued the search. The lab changed everything, its door hung off the hinges, as if forced open. Inside, the air was thick with decay and chemicals. Shattered vials and overturned equipment, activity halted mid-motion. And then we saw them. Bodies, members of Bravo, or what was left of them, were sprawled across the floor, faces twisted in terror. It was a massacre, but the cause was unclear: no bullet wounds, no obvious signs of struggle. Lee gestured toward a corner. Amid a pile of research notes and abandoned experiments lay the body of Commander Haskins. In his stiff, lifeless hand was a notepad, the numbers 58,247 scrawled in shaky handwriting, followed by a single chilling sentence: "They're coming for us." The realization hit like a hammer. Who were they? Was the distress call not a beacon of hope but a warning? The reality of our situation descended: isolation, the fog, the relentless chant of numbers. We were not the rescuers. We were next. Panic set in. Our only choice was to flee. We ran, stumbling through the fog, guided by the distant lights of our vehicle. The numbers echoed in my mind, a chant that seemed to follow us, whispering through the mist. As the vehicle came into view, a shadow emerged. A chill colder than death crawled up my spine as a strange, shrouded figure moved toward us. "We need to go, now." Davis's shout snapped me back. Our training had prepared us for many enemies, but not this. We scrambled into the vehicle. Lee's hands shook at the radio. "This is Alpha Unit calling command, Mayday, Mayday. We need immediate extraction from Zone Bravo. Do you copy?" "Over." The radio crackled, the numbers cut off her plea: 58247. I couldn't shake the feeling that those numbers meant something to what we'd stumbled into as the base fell behind us, swallowed by fog, along with the man who'd stepped from its shadows. But the dread lingered as we sped toward an uncertain future. Davis broke the silence: "We can't let it end here. We need to figure out what those numbers mean and what happened to Bravo. I wanted to know too. We owed them. Thinking of the mutilated, lifeless bodies we left behind, I felt a grim resolve as the first light of dawn pierced the darkness. We survived the night, but the real fight felt like it was just beginning. Armed with nothing but a string of numbers, we carried the haunting memories of what we had witnessed. The mystery of those digits and the horrors that might have befallen Bravo remain unsolved, and it haunts me still. I'm sure it haunts everyone in our squad. The horrors on that base were only a chapter in a much larger, deeper story. Far more terrifying than any of us could have imagined.